Tatyana the Tiger. Tatyana, a female Siberian tiger, was once a peaceful animal, but that changed in 2006 after she attacked a zookeeper who was feeding her, leaving the woman with a permanently scarred arm. An even worse attack happened in 2007. On Christmas Day, just after closing time, Tatyana escaped from her enclosure. That day, 3 young men, 17-year-old Carlos Sousa Jr. and brothers Amritpal and Kolbir Dhaliwal, aged 19 and 23, had been seen shouting at the animals and throwing things. At some point, Tatyana managed to climb or leap out of her grotto. Investigators later discovered that the moat wall was only 12.5 feet high, even though the recommended minimum for tigers was around 16 feet. Concrete chips found in her paws suggested she had scrambled and pushed her way up the wall to get out. Once free, she went straight for the group, and Carlos Sousa was her first victim. She mauled him with brutal force, leaving him with skull and spine fractures, many bite and claw wounds, and a severed jugular vein. He died on the spot. The Dhaliwal brothers ran for their lives, bleeding from their wounds until they reached the nearby locked zoo cafe. The tiger was behind them, and they screamed for help until finally a worker inside the cafe called emergency services. At first, the worker thought the person screaming outside was just mentally unstable and that there was no real animal attack. He told emergency services exactly that. This, paired with the fact that zoo security guards were enforcing a lockdown to prevent Tatyana from escaping the zoo grounds, caused the emergency response to be delayed. When police and armed zoo staff finally arrived, Tatyana was standing over one of the injured brothers. Officers hesitated to fire because they feared hitting him, so they distracted the tiger. When she turned toward them, they opened fire, killing her with a shot to the head. Both brothers were rushed to the hospital with deep injuries to their arms, necks, and heads, but they survived, unlike Carlos, unfortunately. In the days after, the San Francisco Zoo admitted that the moat wall had been far too low and below safety standards. St. James Davis. St. James Davis, a former NASCAR driver, and his wife, LaDonna, had a pet chimpanzee called Mo, whom they raised like a son since he was a baby. They adopted him after poachers killed his mother in Tanzania, and since they couldn't have children, they treated him like one of their own. He wore clothes, ate at the dinner table, and even took part in their wedding ceremony. Years earlier, after a long and painful legal fight because Mo bit a police officer and a visitor, he had been taken away from them. However, they still visited him often, bringing his favorite food and toys. That day in March 2005, they brought cake, candy hearts, and chocolate milk to the sanctuary where Mo was living. As soon as he saw them, he started clapping and smiling, but then, in seconds, something unexpected happened. As LaDonna leaned over to cut a piece of cake, she saw something moving quickly from the corner of her eye. A chimpanzee, not Mo, but another young male named Buddy, had escaped from his cage. Before she could react, the chimp jumped at her and bit off her thumb. St. James pushed her under a picnic table to protect her, but then another chimp, Ollie, also got out. The two animals attacked together with terrifying strength. They jumped on St. James and tore at his face, hands, and feet. They ripped away his skin and flesh until he was left unrecognizable. The sanctuary owner's son-in-law heard the screams, grabbed a revolver, and ran toward the noise. When he arrived, he saw the chimps attacking. He shot Buddy first, then chased Ollie, who was dragging St. James' badly injured body down a walkway. He fired again, killing Ollie too. He rushed towards St. James, who was lying on the ground, barely alive. Paramedics said it looked more like a grizzly bear attack than one by a chimpanzee. St. James had lost almost everything: his fingers, his left foot, much of his face, his nose, lips, and even his testicles. LaDonna's hand was covered in blood, and her thumb was gone. She could only watch while rescuers tried to keep her husband alive. He was flown by helicopter to the hospital, where he stayed for 6 months. For part of that time, he was in a coma. Over the next 4 years, he went through more than 60 surgeries. Doctors rebuilt his face as best they could. He had 1 prosthetic eye and 2 small slits where his nose used to be. St. James survived, but his injuries left him permanently disfigured. However, their love for Mo didn't fade. They went back to court to make sure the city kept its promise to build a home where they could live with him again. In their front yard, they even put up a sign that said, "Free Mo." However, in 2008, Mo disappeared from his new home and was never found. Some people said he escaped into the mountains, while others believed he might have been killed in the wild. Years later, tragedy struck again. St. James died in 2018 after suffering a stroke. LaDonna, now alone, became a victim of financial abuse and lost much of what they had built together. While St. James' death wasn't directly caused by what happened at the ranch, it's fair to imagine it played a role. Jai Li Jun and Duan. In May 2016, Jai Li Jun, a Chinese businessman, was visiting Shishiyaku Wildlife Park. He stopped at the walrus enclosure and started taking selfies and videos with the animal. The walrus was huge, weighing about 1.6 tons. However, only moments later, the animal turned deadly. Witnesses said the walrus suddenly grabbed Jai from behind. At first, many people watching thought the animal was just playing, but the walrus was so big and powerful that once it held on, Jai had no control. It dragged him into the pool, clamped tightly to him, and swung him around while pushing him under the water. Things got worse when Duan, the walrus's longtime trainer, jumped in to help. Duan had raised the walrus since it was a baby and had cared for it for more than 10 years. He was considered the closest person to the animal, but as soon as the walrus saw him in the water, it rushed toward him as well. Instead of letting go of Jai, it wrapped itself around both men, holding them tightly. Even though Duan was a strong swimmer, the walrus's enormous weight kept them trapped underwater. The animal continued to squeeze and push them down. By the time staff and visitors realized it wasn't playing anymore, it was already too late. Both Jai and Duan drowned inside the pool. Maksud and Vijay. In September 2014, a 20-year-old man named Maksud, who was said to have some mental health struggles, got into the enclosure of a white tiger named Vijay. Earlier that day, visitors had been throwing stones and shouting at the tiger. Nonetheless, videos from the scene show the tiger at first looking calm, even curious, as Maksud sat in the enclosure below. For minutes, the tiger did not attack. However, the crowd above kept screaming, and the noise created chaos. The loud shouting agitated the tiger, and eventually, it snapped. Vijay suddenly lunged at Maksud, grabbed him by the neck, and dragged him across the floor of the enclosure. Witnesses were horrified, and some begged the zoo staff to do something, but there were no tranquilizer guns or emergency plans ready. Guards yelled at the crowd to calm down, but many people were too shocked. The tiger kept its grip on Maksud, and within minutes, the young man was dead. His injuries were so severe that he died inside the enclosure before anyone could reach him. Only one guard had been stationed near the exhibit, and he admitted that his main duty was to control the crowd, not to deal with emergencies inside the enclosure. Sarah McClay. On a normal afternoon, zoo visitors were watching the tigers being fed when suddenly they heard a loud scream coming from the tiger house. Inside was 24-year-old keeper Sarah McClay. A tiger named Padang had somehow managed to get through several doors that were meant to keep people and animals safely apart. It immediately jumped on Sarah, and its strength and speed left her with terrible injuries to her head and neck. By the time her coworkers ran toward the noise, Sarah was basically unrecognizable. They flew her by helicopter to the hospital, but her wounds were described as unsurvivable. She died later that same day. After her death, investigators found that the safety systems of the doors had failed. For example, the bolt on the door to the dark den was faulty. It couldn't close properly and would bounce off the frame, leaving a small but dangerous gap of about 0.78 inches. When the official investigation was held in 2014, the jury couldn't say exactly how Sarah ended up in the same space as the tiger, but they confirmed that the broken bolt played a major role in the accident. Kellyanne Walls. Kellyanne Walls had cleaned her bear's cage hundreds of times, but one day, something was different. She went into the 15 by 15 foot enclosure where she kept her black bear, a 350-pound animal she had raised from a cub named Teddy. She threw some dog food to one side of the cage to distract him while she cleaned the other side. She had done this every day for 9 years, but this time, Teddy suddenly attacked her and started mauling her. The bear, much taller and more than twice her weight, overpowered Kelly almost immediately. Her 2 young children, along with the neighbor's children, saw what was happening and screamed for help. The neighbor grabbed his gun and ran to the cage. When he arrived, the bear was on top of Kelly. He said the animal started to move away from her body and began walking towards him. At that moment, he fired his gun. The shots killed Teddy, but Kelly was already dead. Her injuries were so bad that she was pronounced dead on the scene. Officials from the Pennsylvania Game Commission later explained that wild animal cages usually have 2 separate sections, letting owners lock the animal on one side while cleaning the other. Kelly's cage didn't have that setup, or if it did, it wasn't used that day.